The fifth trumpet is the locusts from the bottomless pit who are given power to torment and to torture men for 5 straight months. Revelation 9:5-6 says, "And unto them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. In those days shall men seek death, and they shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them." Now, locusts, natural locusts, normally devour crops. And this is, and especially in ancient times, was very devastating and was often a judgment sent by God to punish evildoers and evil societies. Of course, there's still that sort of thing happens today, right? You get locusts that just come and eat all the crops, and it's just devastating for that food supply and for the culture and for that society. And so entire crops would be devoured, and this would cause great economic hardship and famine. But here, the locusts aren't commanded to eat the crops and to cause famine, but to feast on men. And not so that men die, but so that they should be severely tormented for 5 months. And it says that in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And so the torment of their stings will be so unbearable and so painful that men will seek to die. They'll want to die, but they won't be able to. And it says that death shall flee from them. So they'll just be like writhing in pain and torture, being tormented that entire 5 months. And their torment is described as the sting of a scorpion, but it persists without interruption for 5 straight months. And just a side note here, when we get later into the second half of the book of Revelation and we get to the 5th vial judgment, remember you have the trumpet judgments and you have their parallels, the vial judgments, which are, I believe, going to happen concurrently. You'll have the first trumpet and then the first vial, the second trumpet and then the second vial. And it's in that order. And if we look at the 5th vial in the book of Revelation, in that second half, the 5th vial is darkness upon the earth. The whole earth goes dark. And so if you juxtapose these two, the 5th trumpet and the 5th vial together, in that 5th vial of darkness, you're going to have locusts coming up out of the bottomless pit, stinging men, torturing them. And this is all happening in total and utter darkness. Right? So you can't escape from these things, as we're going to read in a minute. And just imagine, it's dark everywhere. You can't see, and these things are just attacking you constantly. And so this persists for 5 months. And the Bible says that they are only allowed to hurt those who do not have the seal of God in their foreheads. And so we have the seal of God versus the mark of the beast. We'll get further into the mark of the beast in the second half of Revelation. We'll go deeper into that. But the seal of God in the forehead here is a reference to the 144,000 which were sealed by God in their foreheads in Revelation chapter 7 that we saw. This occurred after the tribulation and before the rapture of the church. And so this goes to show that the 144,000 are still around during the wrath of God. So the church is taken up, but the 144,000 are sent down from heaven, as we saw last time. They began in heaven. They were sealed in heaven. They were Old Testament saints, the first fruits of God, as we discussed. I think that's the most credible theory on that. You can go back and watch that if you didn't catch that one in Revelation 7. But we see that the 144,000 are still around during the wrath of God as witnesses of the gospel, of the truth, and of the judgment of God and what's happening. Because the locusts are commanded not to hurt those who have the seal of God on their foreheads or in their foreheads. Now, if you remember, they were these Old Testament saints. And so God is going to continue to have representatives and witnesses of his kingdom here on earth to record, to witness, and to testify as to what they have seen. And so even when the church is removed, God will have the 144,000 who will proclaim God's truth as his wrath is being poured out on the wicked. So people understand why all this is happening. It's not like some aliens or some other thing, or no, this is the wrath of God. Revelation 9:7-10 describes the appearance of the locusts. And it says, and the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. So you see a lot of as and like unto and as it were. These are all similes or metaphors. John couldn't quite describe exactly what they look like because these were supernatural demonic beings out of the bottomless pit, something no one's ever seen before. And so he begins to attempt to describe what they look like. And in verse 8 it says, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. So notice how many times it says, as like unto, as it were. And so these were locusts, but were like unto horses, right? They were like horses. There was no crown on their heads, but it looked like a crown of gold. Their faces weren't the faces of men, but they were as the faces of men. And so this was the best way that John could describe their supernatural and otherworldly appearance. It says that their faces of these locusts was as the hair of women, simply meaning that they had long hair. Okay, because men traditionally have shorter hair and women have longer hair. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 11 that it's a shame unto men to have long hair, and that long hair is the glory of women. And so the locusts had teeth like the teeth of lions, and you wouldn't want to be bit by one of these locusts. Their teeth are as sharp as lions. It says, and their breastplate was like iron. You think of, the exoskeleton of certain bugs. Have you ever seen those bugs? No matter how much you stomp on them and crush them, maybe hit them with a hammer, they still don't die, They still, make it through, maybe with a hammer, But, you've all run across this. And so no matter how much you try to crush them or stomp on them, they just don't die. And so these locusts, these, demonic hordes of beings coming out of the bottomless pit have impenetrable exoskeletons, making them impossible to defeat. They're like iron. And so they fly through the air. They sound like an army of chariots of horses running to battle. So imagine the immensity of power that's coming out of these hordes. It sounds like horses, like war horses running in battle. And now some people compare the locusts to future technology or to machines, that John may not have been able to describe. And some people think that they're helicopters or some kind of future tech. And, I think that's interesting, but I don't subscribe to that view because I believe that these are literal beings that come up out of the bottomless pit, just like it says. It doesn't say that we made these beings. Remember, this is the wrath of God now. This isn't the tribulation where the judgments were natural and man-made, like wars and famine and economic collapse. These are now supernatural judgments, and the Bible literally says that they come up out of the bottomless pit, which is like the pit is described in the Old Testament in numerous verses as hell itself, the lowest parts of the earth, the lowest pit, the pit that no one comes out of. And so I don't believe this is technology. I believe that these are demonic hordes of supernatural beings who torture men for 5 months, not allowing them to die.